on waste to value and decarbonization. So I'll start with a brief intro and then introduce the panelists. So very brief slide. We have a significant and serious waste management problem globally, right? So we're talking about, it's a picture of a landfill, but all kinds of waste. So you've got landfill waste, you've got wastewater, sewer waste, sewer treatment, industrial, agriculture. It's disposing and managing waste is a serious and significant issue globally. On the other hand, I got this chart from Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So this shows energy consumption in the US in 2018. Okay? So on the left is fuel sources, and on the right is uses. And if you look at the left, it's still very heavily fossil fuel driven. So the thickness of these bars shows you how much fossil fuel consumption exists today. Biomass is a very tiny sliver of that, but we have a lot of value in all of this waste. So this is just an example. What we're hoping to do is to have a lively discussion from key experts in both waste management as well as industry and government. Right? So with that, I'll introduce the panel. So my name is Vijay Stevenson. I work for Bloom Energy. I graduated from IIT Madras in 2002, BTech in mechanical engineering. Came to the US for a master's and PhD, and then joined Bloom. So I've been with Bloom for about 9 years now. And I'm keenly interested in electricity generation from renewable fuels. So that's my area. We have, Professor Vinu from IIT Madras, Department of Chemical Engineering. Professor Vinu's research is on converting renewable and non-renewable feedstock into biofuels, materials, chemicals that are useful. So Professor Vinu will talk more about his research. We have Professor Indu, Department of Civil Engineering, and in the Environment and Water Resources Division. And Professor Indu specializes in waste management, optimization, with sewer treatment, wastewater, solid waste, industrial waste. Professor Indu also spearheads the Carbon Zero Challenge, where young entrepreneurs and innovators come together and submit ideas and pitch proposals for getting to zero carbon. So we'll hear a little bit about that. And then on the industry side, we have Evan Edgar, who has more than 30 years experience in waste management, mostly in California. He's been on several advisory councils, advises multiple nonprofits, and is also a very active environmental lobbyist at Sacramento. Then we have Brad from Chevron. Brad's been at Chevron for 3 years now, approximately 2 years, but has spent 12 years at PG&E working on policy and regulatory mechanisms to reduce greenhouse gases. Okay. So we've got a very exciting panel. Really excited to hear from them. So we'll start with Professor Indu to hear more about the work that her lab is doing at IIT.
Hi, good afternoon everybody. Am I audible? Yes. I need to be louder right after lunch. Keep you all awake. Okay. So, although my primary research area is in water, groundwater contamination and remediation, solid waste, we all know, is a huge problem in India, and it was appalling. We are invited to be on government panels to help them make some decisions, and that's how I got involved in solid waste issues of Chennai in particular, being with the Chennai Corporation for several years now. And so we have also started working in that area, and as Vijay just mentioned about the Carbon Zero Challenge, this was also one of the key areas which is given focus in the Carbon Zero Challenge. So I'll quickly give you an overview of what's happening in India in the solid waste, and I would like to present some of the research which has happened in my lab and also in some other labs which were all part of this, came out of, which was funded by the Carbon Zero Challenge, and the ideas came out to be prototypes which are now going to become startups. Some of them are already startups. So I'll be presenting 4 technologies which have come out of the Carbon Zero Challenge. So, yeah. So waste in India is a huge problem, and it's becoming a larger problem with the standard of living going up and per capita waste generation going up, with the population going up. So, as you see here, although we generate about 62 million metric tons, only 42 is being collected. So the rest are all just lying around somewhere or ending up in water bodies. And out of that, if you look at the composition, India's unique characteristics is that a high percentage of organic waste. So technologies which come from abroad have failed most of the time, like waste to energy technologies or segregation technologies. With all the $1 million investments they are making, they didn't really see the end of the day, or they didn't make an impact. So we need to develop a lot of indigenous technologies for these type of composition of waste we are seeing in India. So, and right now, most of the waste is just ending up in dump sites. Although it's called landfills, I would only call them as dump sites. And dump sites are very, very unsafe. We all know that. And one unique example is one of the dump sites in Delhi, which is going to very soon beat the Qutub Minar in terms of the height. Right? It might have already. So this is a year ago, data which is a year ago. Yeah, Delhi particularly, in some Delhi and even other cities, except Chennai, I think the land area available is very small. So they're just going vertical and with no stabilization or structures to make them safe. So it's a very tricky challenge they have. And of course, landfills or dump sites are huge source of greenhouse gases, which are not even accounted for or monitored. So that's another big challenge. Okay, so to summarize, the current problem in the system is that most of it are mixed waste. Segregation, although has become mandatory from the 2016 solid waste management rules, it's not getting implemented in many cities, with the exception of a couple of cities like Pune and Bangalore. We always get only mixed waste. And as I told you, waste to energy plants of different scales and different technology, even gasification has failed in India. And they moved on to micro-composting, decentralized management of organics, and that is also very low-tech and poor O&M, so they need a lot of help there in terms of technology and capacity building. And in terms of the other option for organic waste like biomethanization, which is picking up here, we really have only small scale biogas plants, so the economics do not work out in terms of emission control, or even the slurry which comes out of the biogas plant is not, they don't have a plan for it. So there are gaps, multiple gaps in each of the technology which needs to be addressed. And very recently, Chennai Corporation, since most of our landfill area, I told you, Chennai has very large areas available, so our heights don't go up like Delhi sites. But the land area is in prime property, like OMR, which is the IT hub of Chennai. So they are trying to reclaim land. The government is interested more of land. So a lot of biomining is already happening. Biomining is something, I think in US it doesn't happen at all. So they reclaim these dam sites by digging up the waste and then segregating the semi-decomposed or completely decomposed. And then they have plans for putting it back into the agricultural soil as compost. and then still they don't have a good plan for the plastics and rubber which comes out of these biomimetics. So again, that's an opportunity. I look at it as an opportunity for new technology to come in. And there's a whole big area which is not even talked about, which is industrial waste. Where do they end up? The hazardous waste ends up in the hazardous waste landfill, but there's still a large amount of waste which can be recycled, and we could bring in a very good economics if you bring in the circular economy concept in industrial waste management. So recycling to some extent is practiced, but only in, I would say, paper. We are big on recycling paper. It's been a traditional household activity. We don't throw our newspapers out. So, but then the challenging part in that is houses demand money for the paper what they are throwing out. And so that doesn't help the people who are actually in the middle in terms of economics. Okay. So mostly they don't, they hire very menial, they give menial jobs, and it is not very efficient downstream. So these are the challenges, and I would look at the biggest problem beyond collection and segregation is that of logistics. Logistics of transportation doesn't help at all. We're looking at plastics or a low quality waste material which cannot be recycled, like one-time use plastics or thin plastics or multi-layer plastics. The logistics of transportation doesn't help, although the government has a policy for sending all these to a cement kiln and burn them out. So that's a key thing, apart from economics and technology. So there is need for all this new technology, and as I told you, Carbon Zero Challenge was set up, and we didn't give this as a challenge, but many teams took up plastic and waste as a challenge and came up with different technologies. I would like to showcase a few which came out of that from our lab in IIT. So plastic waste is an issue, I won't go into it. So this is called an Uber X of the plastics. So they are winners of the first Carbon Zero Challenge. So as I told you, logistics doesn't help taking these plastics to the cement plants or large scale plastic pyrolysis units. Most of them are just sitting there and they don't receive the waste. So they came up with this innovative idea of making it compact and taking the pyrolysis unit to the plastic rather than the plastic going to the pyrolysis unit. So they can be loaded on a container and they can be moved around from zone to zone. Chennai has about 15 zones, so the plastics can stay where they are and it can be done. And they've been very successful in generating oil, which is of diesel range. Yeah, I got my signal. And completely emission free. It's a sulfur free oil you're getting, unlike the fossil fuel, and emission free because the gases are also plowed back into the reactor and burned. Okay. So the other technology which came from another colleague of mine, Dr. Varun Kumar's lab, is self-sustained activated carbon production from coconut shell waste. They are the winners of Carbon Zero Challenge, which just got over 2019. And now they have, both the teams have gone out to set up a startup in our research park. So this is more about the technology. I'll come back to it if I get a chance. It's completely automated system where there is a continuous throughput of shells, and again emission free. We have made it emission free and low energy. That's the key here. And I have been working with petroleum industry waste as part of a UAY project funded by the government and industry together. And this is basically to address the petroleum sludge which is generated in multiple locations like terminals, tank bottom sludge, refinery sludge. And we have a microwave pyrolyzer prototype which can extract more oil from the sludge and biochar. And also some condensable gases which can again go back into the system. So the last one, we are also working on petrochemical wastewater because most of the time people are only looking at TPH when you're looking at petrochemical wastewater, but we are looking more beyond that on PAH degradation, because PAHs are the carcinogens. So we've been very successful. One of the PhD students has developed electrochemical based technology. The last but not the least is from human waste. Human urine is our raw material, and this is also one which came out of Carbon Zero, where we are converting human urine to eco-fertilizer, which is almost a zero carbon footprint fertilizer. You get phosphorus, potassium, ammonium, which can go directly to the field. And we are also saving water upfront, because all the urine is collected from waterless urinals. So there's water saving upfront, there's generation of fertilizers downstream, and now we have also generated biohydrogen from urine using aluminum. So this is a very promising technology which addresses the Swachh Bharat initiative, Make in India initiative, low carbon footprint, low water footprint. So I think I'll stop here. I think I'm out of time now, but I would like to finally close with the point that innovations are required to make, like I said, like the other speaker in the morning was telling, that industries look at problems, they don't look at problem number 16, they only look at 1, 2, 3. Most of the time, environment problems are like down below, 13 to 16 or even worse. So we need to make bring up technologies which are low cost, low energy, where industry can accept it readily, and that's why we need innovations. And again, innovation should be very much adapted to the Indian type of waste, because we have, our waste is very unique. Thank you.
Question now?
No, we'll have questions at the end. We'll have half an hour for questions. So thank you, Professor Andu. Very fascinating work.
Okay, very good afternoon to all. So I'm Vinu, and I'm going to be talking about municipal solid waste to energy and fuels research. So thanks to Indu for really setting up the stage, so I don't need to talk more about the context, but what I would like to emphasize here is MSW generated is huge, and again I'm re-emphasizing the Ghazipur landfill. So you have read news stories that Gautam Gambhir, the cricketer, is actually trying to do something about it. But the point is, what are we really going to do about these landfills? Are we going to segregate all the waste there, let's say at least into two major components of bioorganics or bioinorganics, or are we just going to let them build over time, or are we going to incinerate? So the point here is the wastes are really heterogeneous, okay? And that's very classic about the Indian municipal solid waste. So they have high amount of inerts, there is a high amount of moisture content in it, so any conventional, even an incineration technology is going to be really difficult to implement, because you need to first reduce the moisture content, and that requires drying, which is a costly step, right? And even any other thermochemical technologies like pyrolysis that is being implemented for plastics cannot be done for municipal solid waste, because again it is moisture intensive and it has high amounts of inerts in it. So, and again, the per capita generation of the waste is increasing, and typically in Chennai it is about 0.65 kilogram per person per day. So that is the context where we are, and our focus is actually to take the waste as it is and have a black box, right, and then convert it to fuels or energy. Right? So that's our approach in solving the waste management problem. And I would like to also emphasize another parallel, which is about the crude oil imports. Right? So India is heavily importing crude oil, right? And a majority of the imports, nearly 80% of the import, is actually burdening the budget. So again, our proposal is actually to take these waste as it is, and then try to see if it can be converted to an equivalent of a crude oil, or it can be directly converted to energy, okay? I mean heat or power. So I'll quickly run through the renewable energy scenario in India, because we are talking about fuels or liquid fuels, right? It's important to set the context of where India is heading towards in terms of the liquid fuels. So 2G ethanol, or second generation ethanol that is produced from agri residues, remains the top biofuel in India, right? And of course, there are some demonstration scale, experiments with Shell, their integrated hydropyrolysis and hydrotracking technology. Biodiesel is successful, but again, there are like logistics and feedstock issues that it is not really taking up. And of course, plastic is really coming up big. So there are like startups and also CSIR, Indian Institute of Petroleum. So they are trying to develop some pilot scale units to convert plastics. Again, here these plastics are typically good plastics in terms of they are all polyolefins, so you can actually get hydrocarbons and liquid fuels that are equivalent to diesel from them. And what we are really working on is on this, that's the hydrothermal liquefaction technology. So there are some competitors here. So of course Reliance is doing this with microalgae to produce fuels, but where we are really distinguishing ourselves from other major players is that we are actually dealing with municipal solid waste and not with any neat feedstock like an algae or biomass. And of course, on the energy side, there are like co-processing technologies where you try to mix biomass or agri residues with coal and then try to burn. So these are successful, but they have their own problems because once you introduce a heterogeneous material like biomass or even solid waste along with coal, it leads to a lot of downstream problems like slagging, fouling, and corrosion in the boilers. So again, in this space, what we have developed is to treat unsegregated municipal solid waste, we have actually come up with a rotary kiln combustor that we have developed in IIT Madras in order to combat or treat completely unsegregated municipal solid waste. So quickly coming to the waste profile, so this is a typical example of the waste from Trichy, which is a city near Chennai. So you can see that the number of components in the waste are huge, okay, and this is going to differ from region to region, okay. Again, it differs based on the class of living in different areas, in different domains. Majority is biodegradable material. Typically 53% of the waste in India are biodegradable or bioorganic waste, but you do have a majority which include plastics. You can see that coconut shell, okay, it's a typical waste in the MSW from the southern region, right? And you have all sorts of materials in there. Okay, so this is a typical profile, right? And a lot of these, typically the bioenergy plants, they have actually failed. In fact, what Chennai is currently doing is trying to simply incinerate without having to even recover any sort of energy or heat by burning these municipal solid waste. So at the Combustion Center, National Center for Combustion R&D, what we do is to, so this is the rotary kiln that we have developed. So this is a typical structure. So this is to treat completely unsegregated municipal solid waste. So the best experimental place for us is IIT Madras because we actually generate a lot of waste and which are highly segregated. So we can actually do very nice experiments, well-controlled experiments by varying the composition of the feedstock in terms of biomass versus plastics versus inerts and moisture, and then try to do controlled experiments to really understand and develop the combustor, right? So the challenge here is municipal solid waste contains a lot of inerts, right? And to really sustain the flame over a long period of time is a challenge. So what we have developed is a rotary kiln. So rotary kiln is not a new technology. Cement industries use it, and even the hazardous waste disposal units actually use this. But the challenge in actually using a rotary kiln for municipal solid waste is that so in rotary kiln we actually developed what is called as a sieve mesh, which actually rotates inside a static drum, and so we are actually able to separate out all the inert materials as they are fed in, right? And hence we were actually able to sustain the flame over long periods of time, and that led to better efficiency of combustion with a very good carbon conversion efficiency. And so we did try a variety of feedstocks, and importantly we tried feeds which are up to 40%, containing 40% moisture. So with this, we were actually able to demonstrate that even a wet feedstock can be burned efficiently, right? And so this is a typical example. So these are the typical feedstocks that we use, right? We have a shredder, a conveyor belt, and the heart of the unit, which is the rotary MSW combustor. And we integrated that with a standard emission treatment system in order to make sure that the emissions don't cross the Indian boiler emission norms. So far we have been successful, but again, it's very important that we try it out with a variety of feedstocks. Of course, the feedstocks dictate what is the quality of the emissions that we get out of it. And at the bottom, we actually recover the ash, and this is a typical profile of the ash. So we have been successful in doing it at up to 10 kilowatt thermal capacity, and we are now going to be implementing this in BHEL, which is a boiler manufacturer in Trichy, so in order to treat their industrial waste. And we are going to be establishing this in the IIT Madras campus in order to treat 1 ton per day of the waste that are being collected and are essentially disposed out to piggeries and other places. So that's about the waste to energy. And the other thing is about can we generate liquid fuels from heterogeneous MSW? So whatever waste that I showed, right? So that's a very complicated matter. Can we really generate a liquid fuel out of it? So for that, we actually resorted to what is called as a hydrothermal liquefaction process. Okay, so it's simply mimicking what Mother Nature does over millions of years. We are trying to implement it in a short time scale in a reactor. So the concept is at subcritical water conditions, right? The water is not going to behave as H2O, but it's going to be acting as a solvent, and hence it can actually degrade or decompose all the material. So the simple concept is like this. So this is like a glorified pressure cooker, as we call, and so the main products are, we get a biochar and we get crude, and we name it X crude because the process is really feedstock agnostic. So we can actually treat any kind of material, including biomass, algae, plastics, municipal solid waste. We don't need to really segregate them, but really treat them as it is. So the whole idea is, as Satya was also pointing this morning, so it's all about defrastructure. That means we don't need to create an infrastructure to really segregate the plastics or segregate the waste into bioorganics and bioinorganics from the existing landfills, but utilize them as a whole piece, and then try to convert them into value. So that's an experience, our experience with HTL of MSW. So this is a real MSW collected from a landfill, and our proof of concept is all based on a small wind scale reactor, and we are now actually scaling up, at different levels. So this is a typical yield that we can get, the maximum yield. The 58% is the yield that we can get, and the crude is actually a mixture of a variety of components. It is going to be less in oxygen, so it can be blended to a reasonable extent up to 5% with crude oil, which we have tested. And it is a process with net positive energy. So that means the energy that we get out of the process in terms of the crude and the char is going to be more than what the energy that you're going to put into the process to really run it. And our go-to-market strategy is that we have actually demonstrated everything at a 1 liter scale, and we are now developing this 100 liter batch. This is still required in order to really demonstrate that we are able to produce significant quantities or volumes of the crude, so that it can be really subjected to testing, in typical TBP type of analysis to qualify that it can be blended to a certain extent with crude oil. And we are actually doing a 1,000 liter prototype. So that's our next step, where we think that these can actually sit on mobile distributed units, where it can really go around, clean up the garbage around the streets. And finally, if you want to really put it near a refinery, what is all required is a continuous processing facility that will really generate crude in significant volumes. So that's about the energy integration. So again, we can recover energy from the char, and we can also generate heat from the process. And again, the organic rich liquid steam can also be used to power or improve the quality of the crude. So there is a full energy integration that is possible by which we can actually recover the maximum value out of the crude and the char. Okay, multiple applications. I'll probably close in a moment. So it's about it's a very good blend stock with furnace oil. We are actually trying to make a lot of biodegradable or plastics with controlled lifetimes from the heavy crude. And mild upgradation to RFCC feedstock is something that we are really exploring with support from refineries. And of course, it can be fractionated to fine chemicals. Typically, phenolics or cyclopentenones are some of the major components that we can recover from this oil. So the financial estimates, the rough financial estimates tell us that, so this is a comparison between the IIT Madras campus and the Chennai city with the respective populations. So we can actually treat, something like 2.5 tons of waste, okay, with a population of 10,000 people, right? I mean, it shows that we are actually hitting the break-even within 14 months, but that's optimistic, but still, it's actually a good number. If we have to even extend it to 1.5 years or 2 years, that's still a good sign that we are actually able to make profits out of selling the crude and the char. So, at this point, I'd like to thank the contributors. So, Satya is here and many people who really contributed to our conversion work as well as the hydrothermal liquefaction work. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure which of you is next, but
Well, whose slide's up?
Maybe mighty well.
Like snake.
yeah, you?
Where's that? All right. My name is Evan. I'm a garbage man. I'm in recovery. It's a 12-step program. And garbage used to be dirty. Dirty diesel to the landfill. We got a bad name. The mafia, the Italians, the somehow, garbage got a bad name. My job in Sacramento the last 30 years is to clean it up. So instead of being this recycling now, we're into net zero, carbon negative fuels, and we're into a lot of unique things with a lot of policy. We had a great governor, Governor Jerry Brown, and he did a lot of good work out of Governor Newsom now, out of there in San Francisco. He did 5 pillars of waste to value. The first pillar is what he called the Renewable Fuel Standard. Lower carbon fuel standard, whereby we have to have 18% less carbon in our transportation fuel by 2030. And then Newsom doubled down. He wants to get rid of diesel pollution by 2030. So that's call number 1. Call number 2 is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. We're going to make 33% renewable power by 2020. We're supposed to be 33% by 2020, and then 50% by 2030, and we go deep carbon, which means zero carbon by 2045. That's the second pillar. Third pillar is energy efficiency. Not only are we going to double energy efficiency by 2030, we're going to be net zero by 2045 with all the buildings. The fourth pillar is more of a methane mitigation, short-lived climate pollutants, the methane from the landfills and from dairies. Now that, we're supposed to get 40% less methane by 2030, which means 50% of all organics got to come out of the landfills by 2020, and 75% of all organics by 2025. That means 12 million tons of organics in California, which means 100 compost facilities and 100 anaerobic digestion facilities, about $3 billion of investment. The other value we get out of it, once you digest this, you get compost. And I represent the California Compost Coalition, and I used to represent all the garbage companies. And we have these franchises that we get all the exclusive rights to all the waste from all the communities. So we're stuck with all this waste, and we've been making compost for years. But from that, we're going to double down on compost, that we're going to have a healthy soils initiative, that all this compost goes back to California agriculture, and we can sequester the carbon into big soil, not big oil. So that's a big plan by our governors. And California being a nation state, we're kind of leading the way. From all those waste, those 12 million tons of waste, we have a procurement standard that not only big ag uses it, but local government got to buy some back. So the value proposition of waste to value, either they buy compost back to all the different parklands, which is about 100,000 acres of parkland would be amended by 2030, plus agriculture. Of course, we make RNG, we can make up to 74 million diesel gallon equivalency per year at all this organic through anaerobic digestion, which can fuel a fleet at least 2,000. But representing the garbage companies, we want to be on this fuel, get off diesel into RNG a lot sooner than we have. Or we can make bioenergy. For every 1 ton of biomass, we get 650 kilowatts. And there's programs by PG&E called the Biomass program that has a lot of incentives. So next we're going to talk about incentives, but we're not going to do that yet. But there's a lot of opportunity in California. Now the dairy business is pretty big. I know Cal Bio, and they're very unified with all the Dutch and the Portuguese. They have one common voice, and they've really done a great job at actually demonstration, rolling it out. They've been through a lot of Hickson had a lot of problems in the past, but Dairy 3.0 with Cal Bio and what they're doing now with Bloom Energy is unbelievable. One thing that we try to do is that we're community scale. We don't have a lot of infrastructure. We want to be circular economy, they call that. And so when you get and work with the utilities are tough. PG&E is really tough to work with, and pipelines. So we want to avoid the pipeline. We want to go to community scale and use it on site. So that's what we do. The dairies are proving it out, and so are the garbage companies. This is our model. That little unit up on top is next to the airport, San Francisco. It's called Blue Line Facility. And what we do, we take all of the food waste, we make biomethane out of it, put it right back in the truck, and all the digest we go out to the farm and make healthy food for Healthy Soils Initiative. So it's farm to fork, and we don't need a pipeline. And then the biggest thing is about disadvantaged communities. Anything in California, we can't impact our disadvantaged communities. So one time we were dirty diesel done dirt cheap. People think that the garbage industry is bad, but what we're proving out is that we're net zero now, as defined by the airborne. All our facilities are net zero now. We're off diesel, we're making a carbon negative fuel out of zero waste, and we're making a compost that's organically certified, so we're off pesticides, and we're doing it with near zero NOx. So all the new garbage trucks with new engines from the CNG engines, near zero NOx. So at one time we were the bad guys, but today we are the zero heroes of zero waste. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thanks. Well, I'm happy to be here this morning. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to represent Chevron in this. How many slides do you have here?
My set of slides.
So my name's Brad Neff, and I'm a little lightheaded, so I apologize. I came in from Kuala Lumpur this morning. I got up at 4 a.m. Kuala Lumpur time, so I'm a little lightheaded. Somebody in the airplane said, "Oh, it's so great to be so tall because you can reach the overhead bins," but now I'm feeling the altitude, so bear with me. I've got up here a map of Chevron's operations. And the circles is where our upstream operations are, natural gas and oil. You'll see the blue triangles, that's our upstream exploration, and the red upside down triangles, that's our downstream operations. You can see that we're spread out. This is no surprise, but what might be a surprise, and I didn't overlay this, is that 50% of our operations operate in an area that is covered by a carbon regime, a carbon price, a cap and trade, something to that effect. And one of our first priorities in climate change is to reduce the carbon intensity of our operations. So these operations, to reduce our own emissions. And so I hope as we talk today that you'll see us as a potential partner. Because on the other side of this supply is great demand. And the IEA, International Energy Administration, predicts that by 2040 there'll be a 30% increase in demand for energy. And that's coming from population growth. It's also coming from the growth of the middle class around the world. Now those are great things. I think those are things that we should be proud of as humans. The cooperation, the food security, everything that we're able to do to have such peace and prosperity at this time that is driving this energy demand. But of course, as we've been talking about, there's also a big challenge, and that is reducing the carbon intensity of these fuels and taking care of the planet that sustains us. Because unfortunately today, 40% of people live in energy poverty. And so this is a very complex system, as I don't need to tell you, but I don't think we're competing here with the new technologies and solids to waste, or waste to energy, that all forms of energy are needed in this landscape. If you want to know what more Chevron is doing, we produce reports. We try to be transparent, we try to share what we're doing, and so I'll just share that we've done that over the last few years, and those are available to you. So for us, we've set some goals for ourselves. Just recently, it's been a few months now actually, we set a goal to reduce flaring and our methane emissions. Now this isn't the beginning of our reduced flaring and methane emissions. As you know, flaring methane produces CO2. It's a much less GHG intensive greenhouse gas capturing gas than is methane. But we're working on both sides of that. But this isn't the beginning of that. We have reduced our flaring by 26% since 2013. So this is above and beyond what we've already done. We've got operations in Nigeria and in Kazakhstan that have reduced flaring in the order of 90% since 2000. So this is a continuation of our journey, but we've put this stake in the ground, and now we put money behind it. And so that last, there you can see our compensation. Myself and most of my colleagues, our end-of-year bonus is tied to this now. That's meeting these goals, as well as 100% of our executives. Now in the middle there, you'll see that our targets are operated and non-operated, which equals equity. What this means is that our own operated facilities have a goal. We own those, we operate those, we have total control. And so we can make investments, we can reduce those emissions. And you see a lot of companies do this. I hear Gap has just made an announcement that they've got a GHG reduction goal of their owned and operated facilities, right? A certain percentage by a certain date. We go above and beyond that because we have joint ventures in a lot of operations, and we don't operate those. But whatever percentage of the output that we take from those operations, we take responsibility for that same percentage of the GHG emissions, and so we need to reduce those as well and use our influence there. And we go a step beyond that. This week we made an announcement that we want to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel itself, gas by 2 to 5%, and oil by 5 to 10%. So if you compare that to Gap, that would be Gap saying they want to reduce the carbon intensity of the clothes that they sell, right? That's the product that we sell to our customers to reduce that GHG intensity. So I'll just make one final point, I think, and this gets to the first question that Vijay wanted to ask me, is how does Chevron tie in here? Last year we made 2 announcements. They came out very close to each other, and they were both $1 billion commitments. But there were 2 separate. One is for our own internal, our CTV, or Chevron Technology Ventures, $100 million to invest in breakthrough technologies in energy. And we've done that in a number of cases. I'll just pop that up on the next slide. And then OGCI, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, $100 million there to work with other oil and gas companies to develop technologies in energy. So those are 2 different. And then here's some of the companies that we've already invested in. I've heard some great technologies today that I hope we have continued discussions with. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes. Let me lead in with a question for both Brad as well as Evan, and then open the floor to questions for all of our panelists. So Brad, you touched upon the question I was going to ask you. Chevron don't usually associate that name with waste or agricultural waste or landfill waste, so on. You mentioned investment in new technology. So how would wonderful research is coming out of IIT Madras on waste management? How do you see that? What is Chevron's role in accelerating some of these very practical work that's coming out of research from universities? So that's question number 1 for you.
Okay.
You touched upon incentives. So what's the role of government to accelerate, this engagement between, large corporations such as Chevron and university research that's working on cutting edge technology?
Well, I'll just start by CTV, Chevron Technology Ventures, is evaluating a lot of different opportunities. They've invested in a few. I understand, Vijay, as we were talking, you're familiar with one, the CalBio. And they're looking for breakthrough technologies that are scalable, that can compete in the marketplace on price, that have the potential to bring down costs to a point where they'll be competitive. And so they've invested in batteries and other technologies that you may not think of or consider are Chevron or traditional oil. But that's what their role is to look into the future and what's next, and to do that seed funding, to do those tests, to grow that market where they see possibility. But it's got to be able to scale, because this is such a large, to scale and bring down the price, I think, are key.
Okay. And some of the topics that Evan touched upon, such as LCFS, RPS, does Chevron participate in those, or how does that work?
Definitely, and policy is a big piece of this. We participate, we comply with LCFS and RFS, and that takes up a lot of our time. And I think we need to be very, very mindful of how that policy is set up, because when it's set up in a technology neutral way, it can really drive, I think, to the best solution. When it's set up in a way to drive a specific answer, then I think we have unintended consequences where we don't get to perhaps the advanced biofuels, but we stick with what we have now, and we kind of get stuck.
Okay. So how does, again, from your perspective, how do you make that not happen?
Good points. Up on the table, up on the wall here, I have the cap and trade program. You talk about different schemes that you has. California has a cap and trade of $1.6 billion every year. And at the airport, they do pick winners and losers. They do pick technology winners and losers. Right now, we're doing a carbon negative fuel with RNG with near zero NOx, and we used to get money from the low carbon transportation, 182 million. We used to get the $50,000 difference between the new engine, but the airport is picking electrical over RNG. So we still can progress it, but we lost all the incentive funding. So each and every year, we fight for that money to get that difference, but we're going to move on without it because the airport are bypassing anything RNG. We get stuck with a bad name because it's like CNG, or they think we're fracking. But we're not fracking gas, we're fricking carbon negative. And they don't get it. But we try to get those incentives. So we're losing incentives here. And then the biggest thing on the low carbon fuel standard is this chart with dairy is like carbon density minus 280. Yeah, unbelievable. I'm over here minus 25.5. I'm standalone AD. And then electrical is plus 30. So I try to explain to the air board that we're carbon negative now. They're letting climate change policies of deep carbon give way to greenhouse gases reductions today. So, but the incentive is by staying carbon negative. The big incentive is the RIN value and low carbon fuel standard. It's like in today's market, if we make a RNG, we can get to 5.78 cents at DGE incentive from the RIN pricing and from low carbon fuel standard 2. That's unbelievable. So that's what's driving all the anaerobic digestion today. But however, that's volatile market. It goes up and down, and the banks don't recognize it. So when you go for funding for anaerobic digestion, the banks don't recognize this as a long-term process. But in today's market, this is what's driving the development. We have to do 100 facilities, $3 billion by 2025, and it's going to be the RIN market. If we can monetize it for long-term sustainable, that's what's going to drive the incentive funding. And another program is called Biomass, is that we take the wood chips, biomass gasification, and we get up to 110 megawatt. This is up to 3 megawatt, small scale, community scale biomass gasification. We get 12.77 cents a kilowatt hour. Like solar's going for 4 or 5 now. So we get that. If it comes out of dairy is 18.77 for CHP, and then forest gets 19.77. However, trying to deal with utilities is tough. We have a lot of incentive pricing, but try to get interconnection. And just when I got all these projects ready to go, PG goes bankrupt and kills me. So it's a push-pull. It's tough out there. And then all types of incentives on health and safety. By doing SB 1383, the near zero NOx, the asthma, the avoided health impacts.
So for the benefit of the audience, what's SB 1383?
SB 1383 is a short-lived climate pollutant. 75% of all organics got to get out of landfills by 2025. It's about 12 million tons. Instead of making all that methane in the landfill, we have a waste to value by making compost and RNG. And then all the co-benefits of the health benefits are huge for disadvantaged communities. So we kind of tie together from Bakersfield to Reading, the whole valley needs our help. And last but not least, the biggest incentive is as our carbon goes down, our GNP goes up, we have decoupled jobs or the environment. For the longest time, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger said that we want clean air, we want clean water, we want an economy, and we can have both. And California has proven it out, and with regards to the GNP has gone up, our carbon footprint way down, we are on track to meet all our goals when it comes to meeting all our climate change goals. So we have a lot of incentives for a nation state, and we're trying to roll them out here in California to take them worldwide.
Thank you so much. We'll open the floor to questions. I think you had a question.
Yeah, my question is to, I think, the Professor Indu. It has to do with the Prime Minister's goal of eliminating single-use plastics. Do you have a comment about the goal, first of all? Secondly, what time frame do you think the goal can be achieved?
Single-use plastics, in terms of the cutlery and other stuff, I think it is very easy to achieve it instantaneously. There are two classes of single-use plastics. One, which are the packaging ones, like the Lay's chips, multi-layer, or the sachets which carry liquid stuff. Those are the ones which are going to be very challenging to achieve because there's no technology yet which can replace those material. But a large part of the single-use plastics, it can be achieved, and it's even before the Prime Minister, he's yet to launch it.
October 2nd.
He pulled back.
Oh, you pulled back?
He pulled back for some reason. But other states like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu have launched it a year ago, and sometime during 2019, Tamil Nadu launched it. And it was amazing. The very next day, you were able to see a change in the market. Your street vendors, they adapted it instantaneously because I think, and I was happy, India is traditionally it's in our culture to go the sustainable way, right? So we know it's just a few years before we switch to these single-use plastics. So it's easy for India to revert back to our traditional. One example is the flower vendors in India. They give this thin plastic bags when you go and buy flowers from them. The very next day when Tamil Nadu banned single-use plastics, they went back to the banana leaf and the banana fiber to tie it up. Everything, even now ice cream comes in a banana leaf cup. And plates, we went back to the old leaf plates. So we have it and it's still there, the material is there. So I think for India it's not a problem, it's just the policy has to be really implemented in the hard way. But again, as I told you, the liquid sachets, that is something which is an extended producer responsibility. Industry has to take stock and come up with alternatives. They should be pushed for it. It can be done.
You want to pass this? Yes.
Who's next?
So I have a question for Dr. Vinu. So as you talked about municipal solid waste, so has there been an analysis on how the profile of that waste will change, will affect the efficiency of the system once you scale up? And also because there are different variations in what kind of waste is generated in different parts of our own country. So like, is there a range that you guys are looking at or analysis done on what's the margin of
very good
variation?
question. So we have done it. Okay, but the quick answer to your question is yes, it varies. Okay, from place to place, and as I was also pointing out, even within a city, based on different zones and based on the lifestyle, right, the waste is going to be different, right? And when we, the best thing is when we really take everything together and then do a processing. Let's say, as far as the combustion is concerned, it is just all going to be converted to heat, right? And when it comes to the hydrothermal liquefaction, we do see a range in which the yield of the liquid or the quality of the liquid is going to change. But we see that it is also not too wide a range. So for example, in terms of numbers, the yield, typical yield would vary in the range of something like 30 to 40% of the oil based on the quality of the feedstock, and the final heating value would typically change in plus or minus 10%. Right? And we know ways to really control the quality based on the type of feedstock that comes in. Right? There are ways to really tweak the operating conditions to get what we want. And that's something that we also do in the lab scale, in the small scale version, we typically test a variety of these.
Just a quick follow-up. Has there been at any point that you feel like the system will not be feasible or will not be maybe not commercially viable if the profile of that waste changes, like more of plastics than organic waste?
It is possible. So that is why we see an advantage in treating the municipal solid waste as it is versus really segregating them and then processing it. So if the plastic is going to increase to, let's say, beyond 50-60%, right, then we are going to be ending up more in the solid product, or the char yield is going to be pretty high, right? So that is going to happen when we really cross an upper limit on the composition of the plastics.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Just to add to what Vinu said, in Chennai there are actually 2 dump sites, one in the north and one in the south. And I think there is in general, the South Chennai population is a little bit more affluent when compared to North Chennai. And correspondingly, the South Chennai dump waste actually has a higher calorific value than the North. So I think the calorific value of the waste actually is proportional to the health of the people.
They grow more food.
I guess so, I don't know. So the more useful waste you generate, useful waste is actually a contradiction in terms of, Indian waste is really waste, and we are like super efficient in utilizing waste in that sense. Right? So, but if you're actually having more calorific value, it's actually a bad thing. And it also becomes a very challenging thing for us to utilize, right, if it is low calorific value. The point I want to actually ask or make in the context of Chevron is, just want to add to what Vinu said about not having to segregate, right? And he was pointing out that we don't want this infrastructure for segregation. We should have technology that can enable a non-segregated thing. So the question is that you get this crude. The point we had in the morning was we have another startup from the HCRD which is making these turbine engines with a specific combustion technology called lean direct injection that we developed. That is now amenable to being fuel agnostic, which essentially means that I don't really see the point anymore of having to do this fractional distillation in these huge refineries into diesel, kerosene, petrol, and all of these. So Vinu gives the crude, and he was actually being very modest in saying that you just mix 5% with the petrol and so on. No, take the 100%, remove the sludge, use the oil in the engine that we have, so we can actually put the oil companies as they are right now out of business completely.
One more question.
I think you should respond. Is that a question? I guess I don't understand the question. If you're using an engine that's fuel agnostic, you still need the energy source to go into it.
So the point is we don't need to necessarily deal with diesel, petrol, and all those things separately anymore.
You don't need to refine the
you don't need to refine.
there's no refining. Yeah, I think that's great. That's just what that's my point of view. I don't know how to respond.
Okay, one more question and then we'll end. I think we're well over time.
So the professors listed a few different technologies such as HDL, gasification, biogas generation, and so on. Do you have any comments on the viability? Have there been, for example, some of these tested? Here, biogas I know has been, but how about the other technologies such as HTL, gasification, and so on in California? And do you see any regulatory or other types of challenges?
In California, we're in the source separation. You got to separate the waste stream. You got good organics, so you need good compost. So that digestate, we want to make organic compost for the soils. When you have mixed waste and mixed materials, the waste stream, the digestate, or the biochar is contaminated. It's tough to use. So in California, we don't have incineration, or they don't like mixed waste systems. But what we do have is biomass gasification for clean feedstocks, for clean wood waste. So the cleaner the material, you get clean energy, you got clean offtakes for the biochar, which you can sequester in the soil for 1,000 years. And when we take biochar and compost, it's really good for healthy soils. So that technology, we're pro-gasification, but mixed waste doesn't work in California on a policy level or the technology level because of the off gases and incineration. Some is better than others, but you just can't on a policy level. They're not having any type of that activity in California.
Even with, I don't know the...
I can actually respond to your question on the implementation of the hydrothermal liquefaction. It's actually an emerging technology, and you do have some players in the Europe, typically in Denmark, where they are actually going up in the scale to really treat a variety of waste, including the dairy waste or the sewage sludge to the biocrude. And there is also an installation in Australia where they're trying to do the same thing. Where we stand as, and in India, of course, Reliance is doing it for algae to fuels, but of course that's a good feedstock and they are doing it. And where we really we really distinguish or differentiate ourselves is in doing this solid waste, and that's where we see a challenge and an opportunity in realizing the production of the biocrude from by HTL of the municipal solid waste. And coming to the emissions, of course, it will again depend on the quality of the feedstock. So as Satya was pointing out, we are actually developing through the other startups in the NCCRD, the microgas turbines that can really take any kind of fuel or even the off gases that come out of the HTL, which will contain significant amount of carbon dioxide, can be actually burned and converted to power and energy. So there will be some issues with respect to the NOx and SOx if the feedstock is going to contain the NOx and SOx. But again, there are ways to really trap those nitrogen and sulfur in the solid residue, right? That's one way by which we can really avoid them, getting them into the atmosphere by burning of the liquid fuel. So those are some of the other alternate strategies that we are also working on.
I have a quick question to understand what's happening to the plastics which goes segregated either from the compost in US, now that there is
good question. It's called
going out of the country.
The China storage is killing our recycling rate.
Yeah.
It's going to landfills. The landfills have gone up 8 million tons over the last 6 years.
Okay.
California, because we have such strict environmental guidelines, industry doesn't come to California to build plants. So we have no plastic remanufacturing. For ones we do PET, we have some HDPE, but all the other mixed plastics down the road and down the line, it's all going to the landfill today.
So pyrolysis is not yet considered as an option.
No, we tried it so many times, but we get run out by environmental justice groups and by environmental groups in Sierra Club. So in California, we're not a manufacturing state anymore. We send some to Nevada, Arizona maybe, but unfortunately, because it's our fault. China did the right thing. We shouldn't be dumping plastic on Asia. That's wrong. So by rejecting us, we should have our own solutions. We don't. And unfortunately, I represent the recycling industry. We're losing money. So we're charging the consumers more in order to have cleaner feedstocks to try to get manufacturing done on PET and HDPE. But the rest of the plastics are going to the landfill.
how about your compost? Now with this new policy, there's going to be more compost. India, the transportation logistics fails all our technology, because then the farmer somebody has to pay for the transportation, and then it doesn't become viable, and we have fertilizer subsidies.
Yeah.
So people still prefer the fertilizer than taking the compost.
Good question. I represent the California Compost Coalition. We make organic compost, and in today's market we have value. Like having organic for the grape industry, vineyards, cannabis, as well as nursery. In today's market, we're moving 7 million tons a year. The question is, all this new stuff, that bioplastics and paper that comes, they're going to compromise our quality. So that bill this year, SB 54 and 1080, failed. It's going to come back next year, where they're going to ban single use by the year 2025. But they're looking towards the compost industry to solve the problems. So I'm an engineer on the standards boards, and we're making sure that anything that is called compostable or biodegradable is truly, ASTM standards in order to make sure that we can take it. Otherwise, we don't want it. So we're not the Pollyanna for the plastics industry. We don't want that. You don't dump on compost. We want to preserve our quality for the farmers and healthy food.
Can I just,
Okay, I'd like to, somebody has a question?
I think he
I just wanted a second chance to respond very quickly if I could.
Okay, please, yeah, you have the privilege of doing that.
Thank you. I would just like to point out that we do have a refinery that that we've turned into a wind farm in Wyoming. I think there's a lot we can do, and I think in a lot of discussions, the goal turns into not solving climate change or making a better environment for ourselves, but to put oil and gas out of business. And I would like to change that conversation if I could. And like I said at the beginning, so that we can be partners. We're an energy company. We know how to scale. We know how to get energy. And that's our mission. And so if you've got a better way, let's work on it together.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to give a nice round of applause to this panel. I think this is a very interesting topic, and more of it is something we're going to hear in the years to come. So thank you for all these things that you've been able to say. A couple of quick announcements. We're going to have a little break now, because we need to regroup back in this room in about 15 minutes. We are, so in the lobby, there is light snacks. Look for the table with the red tablecloth to identify the fresh food. So, we're like moving at a certain pace, we're not able to clear out all the food in time. So, but I just heard applause from the other room, so maybe I'll let you go quickly so that you can So, but please be ready to be back in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. Good job.